"Are you sure you want to handcuff me?" she asked, her eyes cutting like a knife. They thought she was prey, but they had just declared war on the nightmare of the entire police force. "Do you really believe justice is real? In your state, is it being sold off day by day? Don't wait until it's your face pressed to the ground to finally open your eyes." New York, in the late afternoon of early winter, always carries a quiet gray light that no other city can imitate. The sun quickly hides behind the glass skyscrapers, leaving a thin yellow streak spreading onto the early morning rain-wet sidewalks. Exhaust from buses and taxis drifts like old cigarette smoke, clinging to neon signs that flicker while revealing the damp, moldy colors of a city long accustomed to swallowing hopes whole and intimidating the weak. Amid the hurried crowd jostling to catch an early ride before the cold night, Veronica Hayes stands out unmistakably. Her long trench coat hugs a slender but straight figure, like the boundary of discipline she has set for herself throughout 10 years of studying law and standing in court. A thick pair of file folders is held tightly against her chest, acting as a shield against curious or judgmental glances that sweep across her face. Her hair is neatly pinned at the nape, but it does not hide the tension at her jawline, where sleepless nights spent digging through files to uncover the truth have carved a mark no one can smooth away. Veronica's eyes scan the crowd like a sharp blade cutting through the noisy reeds, but beneath that cold steel, a fragment of an old memory sometimes flashes. The red and blue flashing lights reflecting on her father's face, a black man forced to bow his head before the barrel of a gun and rusty handcuffs. Before being pushed into the police van, he turned and whispered one sentence very softly. "You must believe in justice, daughter." "Yes, certainly. You know it must, That instruction is like a needle piercing Veronica's heart every night she forces herself to remember why she still survives in this profession, reaching into the snake's nest to drag evidence into the light. She weaves through an intersection clogged with honking cars, a newly lit street lamp casting a slanting beam on a strand of her hair and the corner of a folder poking out of a leather briefcase. Inside are dozens of pages of reports marked with red circles, the names of officers, inspection reports crossed out, and hand-edited files made to turn innocent people into criminals. On top, a few sheets have started to wrinkle, corners stained with cigarette ash, signs that she is not the only one to have touched them. Her hand tightens on the files, knuckles white under the leather glove. In Veronica's mind, a name flashes, then fades. LaRouge. It is not yet time to bring him into the light, but this grip will soon tighten around his throat if these files land on the prosecutor's desk. She stops before the glass door of a supermarket open all night, warmth spilling out mingled with the cheap smell of grilled meat. Behind the counter, a rain-slick parking lot waits like a trap about to spring. Veronica pulls out her phone. The screen shows a message from an unknown number. "They know you're digging through the files. Be careful." A breath of white mist dissolves in the fog. Veronica's eyes catch the light of a hunted animal refusing to stay still. She murmurs to herself, "Want to kill me? Fine, but I will drag the whole rotten pack down with me." Then her footsteps touch the cold cement floor, waiting for the night to swallow the predator who does not yet know he is the prey. Night has clung tightly to every window frame of the rented apartment where Veronica Hayes returns after a day carrying a pile of documents that anyone who touches could use as an excuse to eliminate her without a court order. The kitchen is cold and cluttered with files. On the gray-painted wall, countless yellow sticky notes are densely scattered, connected by red threads stretched like a spider web linking names, dates, and arrest locations. Her bedroom window looks from a distance. It looks like a trap. Veronica has locked herself inside just to catch the monster wearing a police badge who sits there calmly, draining the budget dry. Her hand flips through yellowed reports, edges frayed from repeated finger pressure. The signatures repeat like a curse. ordinary-sounding police names, but tonight, under the dull yellow desk lamp, they are bound tightly together by red circles Veronica has drawn like a dog collar. Smudged eraser marks leave residue, sloppy correction lines, faint fingerprints emerging under her magnifying glass, each tiny piece like scattered bones, forming the dirty shadow of the name LaRouge, standing out like an ink blot that cannot be washed away. She types on her laptop as research windows overlap, data streams tangled. Among meaningless names is a face soaked in sweat and blood. Her father, the night he was dragged from their home. Veronica bites her lip hard to hold back tears. They killed my father with paperwork. Now, how many more will they kill using the same trick? How many won't live long enough to scream that they are innocent? Near midnight, Veronica curls up in a corner of a cheap cafe, the smell of diluted coffee mixed with damp walls. Opposite her sits Daniel, a young cop who once stood beside LaRouge in a blue hat, now trembling like a dog stripped of its badge. He looks around nervously, as if fearing someone is hiding behind the cafe's pillars. His voice breaks as he pushes a heavily folded piece of paper across the table. "Ms. Hayes, you shouldn't go too far. I signed for LaRouge before. I know the original copy hasn't been destroyed, but if you dig there, they won't let you walk out." Veronica does not answer, her eyes fixed on the paper with the address of an old archive, rumored to hold dozens of original reports, buried beneath newly altered files designed to frame those too poor to hire lawyers. In her eyes, the yellow light pools into a cold flame. Stepping out of the cafe, the night air bites at her neck. Veronica quickens her pace, her coat collar brushing against the rain-wet sidewalk. Through the brightly lit bakery window, she catches the reflection of a black car parked across the street. Smoke curls out from the slightly open glass door, and a figure sits motionless, the corner of their eyes flashing red from the dying embers of a cigarette. She does not look back again, her lips pressed tight, the sweat-musty note crumpled and distorted in her hand. An anthill. I just stepped on an anthill, Hayes. Back at the apartment, she sticks the archive address right in the middle of her spiderweb map. Next to it, an old photo of her father, his face bruised and swollen, hands tied behind his back. The desk lamp casts light over Veronica's cheekbones, splitting her face into two halves, like a mask. One, Veronica Hayes, the polite legal mind, honing arguments in court. The other, raw and ready to dig through the mud to bring cacti bones into the light. She hisses through clenched teeth, her voice rough like grinding stone. "They think they can silence me with mud? I'll pull out the teeth of each of them before they can swallow me." The night continues to exhale cold breath onto the ceiling, while a blade has already slipped from its sheath. No hallway light needed as witness. New York night reached midnight, yet the streets were still scattered with distant sirens that quickly vanished among foggy intersections. Veronica pulled up the collar of her coat, her hand still cold from the half-finished cup of coffee. Daniel disappeared just as he had appeared, a trailing ellipsis left in her mind, a jumble of questions left unspoken. Stepping onto the sidewalk, she immediately sensed something was off. The slow, rhythmic steps behind her were distant enough not to echo sharply, but close enough to send chills down her spine. Veronica exhaled, switched hands to carry the heavy folder, then slipped into the sparse crowd at the intersection where the light was still green. She ducked into a convenience store at the corner, her hand gliding over neatly arranged bottled waters while her eyes fixed on the cashier's glass. In the reflection, a figure stood hidden behind a promotional sign, a cap pulled low, shoulders hunched. Catching his eyes through the glass, Veronica was certain this was no coincidence. She paid for the bottle, stepped out, and this time turned into a narrow alley leading straight to the supermarket parking lot. The alley was tight, walls rough with moss-covered bricks, weak yellow lights casting faint circles of light like cat eyes. Veronica clutched the folder to her chest, quickening her pace but not running. "Police? Call 911?" A bitter laugh stuck in her throat. Pointless. If the pursuer wore a badge, who would answer her call? The parking lot was vast. High beams poured down on the wet asphalt. her sedan nestled between trucks parked at the far corner. Veronica pulled out the key, pressed the remote unlock button, hearing the dry beep that sounded like a false sign of safety. She glanced around. The stranger had vanished behind a row of trucks. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key into the door. The night air mixed with dampness and the faint, burnt smell of a truck's exhaust running somewhere far away. The sound of rubber soles scraping on concrete behind her made Veronica freeze. She turned sharply, heart pounding. The young man in the cap and dark hoodie, hands deep in the front pocket, head bowed low, leaving only his chin visible, stood there as if he had been waiting for a long time. Veronica kept her voice as calm as possible, each word cutting through the night air. "What do you want?" He didn't answer, just stepped closer, brushing past her side, moving around toward the trunk as if to check or search for something. His breath carried the smell of cheap cigarettes, mixed with sour sweat and cold wind. Before she could react, he feigned wiping the rear window, then suddenly darted behind the trucks. Everything happened within a few breaths. Instinct pushed her to open the trunk, scanning every corner with her phone's flashlight. Only a jumper cable, an old spare tire, and some tire-changing tools lay inside. Nothing unusual. She slammed the trunk shut harder than necessary, her breath steaming white in the cold night, unaware that hidden under the spare tire was a tightly wrapped plastic package, sealed with tape, waiting to become bait in a dirty game she never suspected. Veronica closed the trunk, her hands still icy, fingers stiff. The New York night wind grew heavier with the smell of dampness and burning gasoline. She scanned the parking lot again. Only a few trucks remained motionless, and the stranger had disappeared like smoke dissolving in fog. Yet a warning rose from deep inside her throat, a silent alert that something had just slipped beyond her control. She climbed into the car, slammed the door, and the automatic lock clicked sharply. Her phone screen lit up in her palm, Daniel's name glowing at the top of her contacts. She called, hearing 3 rings, then a busy signal. The hastily typed message, "Where are you? I need to verify the address you just gave. Urgent," was ignored, showing only "delivered" without the read mark. The smell of old paper from the folder lingered around the driver's seat like a reminder. She had gone too deep to turn back now. Leaning back, she rested her head on the seat, the rearview mirror reflecting the pale yellow streetlights bleeding onto the concrete. The parking lot was eerily silent. No strange footsteps, no shadow lurking behind the trucks, only her, the car, and the heavy folder on her lap, like a rusted iron block pressed against her heartbeat. Her mind raced through possibilities. The strange young man, Daniel's silence, the warehouse clue. Maybe it was all bait. Maybe she had just stepped into a trap set by someone. But after 10 years digging through rotten justice, she knew suspicion was one thing, stopping was another. The sound of another engine pierced her thoughts like a needle through her reasoning. A patrol car slowly entered the lot, headlights shining straight into her windshield. In that instant, Veronica clearly saw the badge LaRouge Police faintly visible on the car's side. Her heart sank, then clenched instantly. The patrol car door opened. LaRouge stepped out, his relaxed posture of someone sure of victory. His uniform was neat, fingers tapping a citation book on his thigh. He didn't hurry, casually walking around the front of the car, eyes scanning the cabin as if piercing through bulletproof glass. Veronica tightened her grip on the folder, her breath shortening into sharp bursts, her body pressed tight between the leather seat and steering wheel, every ounce of alertness focused on the papers in her hand. Knock, knock. The glass tapping echoed, brazen and lazy like how LaRouge interrogated innocent people her father had faced before. He leaned close, a crooked smile curling on one side of his mouth. "Sorry, Lawyer Hayes. We received a report about a suspicious vehicle. Could you step outside and open the trunk for inspection?" Veronica saw in his eyes the ruthless light, the glare of someone hiding bait before pretending to ask the prey. "Anything unusual in your trunk?" Before she could protest, the clacking of boot heels echoed from both ends of the parking lot. 2 more officers appeared, one blocking the front, one at the rear, hands resting on holstered guns as if waiting for LaRouge's signal. At this moment, Veronica still believed the threat lay only in the folder she clutched. She did not know that beneath the trunk, right next to the spare tire, the taped package waited silently to be discovered and bury her under a mound of accusations just as they had done to her father years ago. And this time, the trap had snapped shut cleanly, without a single gap for her to pull away. LaRouge stepped closer to the car, his footsteps striking the concrete sharply, deliberately pounding like the barking of a police dog before it attacks. He knocked on the window again. This time the knock was a command. Step outside or be dragged out. His eyes scanned the lawyer's badge on Veronica's chest, then stopped on her face, where a streak of sweat blurred the hairline. He cracked a crooked smile, a mix of power and cruel amusement. The Hayes family. That name sounds familiar. Your father was well known, wasn't he? I've read through some old files. Like your father, you're easy to get into trouble too, huh? Veronica heard each word roll down her throat, then scrape back up like barbed wire. She clenched her teeth, pulled the key from the ignition, keeping her voice steady. Officer Luge, if you suspect something, I demand to see a search warrant. He smirked, tilting his head toward the phones of curious bystanders gathering at the edge of the lot, pulling out his citation book as if playing the righteous role. Lawyer Hayes, I have the right to search any vehicle if I detect suspicious signs. A verbal order is enough, especially when the owner has a family criminal record. I don't want to make it hard for you, but cooperation will be better for you. An officer from the patrol car approached, gloved hand resting lightly on Veronica's door latch like a warning. Resist, and the door will be forced open, her arm broken like any other suspect. Anger raged inside her chest, but Veronica opened the door and stepped onto the cold ground, facing LaRouge at a distance just close enough to hear him hiss through clenched teeth. Stay still, Lawyer Hayes. I'll help clear your name if there's nothing dirty in the car. He raised his voice toward the crowd filming. Witnesses, we are following procedure. If everyone is innocent, there's nothing to fear, right? His words fell on Veronica's ears like nails sealing her escape route. She kept her hands close to her sides, nails digging through thin gloves, eyes fixed on LaRouge's hands as he bent to open the trunk. The night stretched, tense as a tight string about to snap. In the dark space behind the trunk lid, the neat package lay coiled like a snake, waiting for the right moment to strike its unseen prey. LaRouge bent down, hands skillfully reaching under the spare tire, moving like a mechanic knowing every bolt of a car that never belonged to him. He pulled out the sealed nylon package, wrapped tightly in silver tape 3 times, inside swelling with white powder that could ruin any lawyer's career with just a trace. He stood up, holding the package high under the streetlight, voice mockingly triumphant. Lawyer Hayes, how do you explain this? Foreign object? Veronica froze, the cold from the pavement rising into her neck, crawling down her spine, numbing her mind. Her eyes locked on the package, lips parting, then closing. All she could think was 2 words, too late. Everything slipped from her hands, fast as a pre-printed indictment waiting for a name to fill in. She stepped forward, voice faltering but trying to hold on to dignity. I demand the proper procedure be recorded with my lawyer present. LaRouge cut her off with a sneering laugh, then abruptly turned to the crowd filming on their phones. See, everyone, we're just doing our job. She should have cooperated earlier to avoid this hassle. Now, she's obstructing law enforcement, a lawyer acting like a criminal. Before Veronica could breathe, a rough hand twisted her arm behind her back. A dry snap echoed, making her grit her teeth. Eyes blurred, but no tears fell. Cold handcuffs slid over her wrists, locking with a metallic click, like the chain that held her father in a prisoner transport years ago. Amid the crowd's murmurs, she heard a woman's voice sneer. What kind of lawyer? Just another drug dealer. Her mother's crying from years past echoed in her memory, mixed with the siren's howl shattering the eerie silence. LaRouge leaned close to her ear, his breath smelling of cheap cigarettes and unhidden triumph. Be smart, hey? You're good, but I'm not stupid. Fight me, and you'll only earn their pity once, then silence forever. Veronica was shoved face down onto the cold metal hood, cheek pressed to the ice-cold surface, her vest collar askew, revealing a trembling collarbone. In front of her, the flashing headlights reflected her face in the cuffs, the present her layered over the shadow of the little braided girl, once powerless, watching her father being led away. A passing ambulance siren tore through the street nearby like a starting gun, and in that brief moment, every phone camera recorded clearly. A black federal lawyer's wrist broken against the hood in self-proclaimed civilized New York, and the trap was now fully set, locking her into a game without any opening to escape. The crowd grew thicker by the minute, phones raised high like a forest of black sunglasses fixed on every movement of Veronica. Whispering, sneering laughter and cheap chants clashed, then shattered under the pale yellow streetlights of the parking lot. A guy in a faded gray sweatshirt laughed loudly, holding his camera close to LaRouge's face as if cheering, "Arrest her, the lawyer's trafficking now. Wow, this clip will get millions of views, officer." Rouge adjusted the collar of his uniform lazily and nodded at his team to tighten the handcuffs. His voice suddenly hardened, loud enough for the lurking cameras to catch. "I hereby arrest Ms. Hayes for possession of illegal substances with intent to distribute. Any resistance will be dealt with according to the law. Please keep order." After speaking, he calmly glanced at the live-streaming crowd with a face as if he were the embodiment of discipline everyone should trust. Veronica felt the cold metal cutting into her wrists, suffocating and stifling. The flashing of phone cameras captured her image from every angle, turning a federal lawyer into entertainment, to be publicly shamed before the online mob could realize she was set up. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, her eyes narrowing like a thin blade, reminding herself, "Don't cry, don't beg. They just want to see you fall." LaRouge leaned in, his breath mixed with the smell of cigarettes brushing her ear. His voice rumbled low like a cold laugh stabbing the back of her head. "You're famous now, Hayes. Millions of views for a crying lawyer. Know your place and stay silent." A phone lens flashed right in front of her face. The person holding it deliberately zoomed in to capture her face in handcuffs. Veronica turned her head slightly, her deep black eyes staring straight through the lens, steel-hard, proud, filled with fury but not trembling. She said nothing, letting her gaze imprint the image of this victim into the crowd's memory, a living sign proving she once stood tall before a pack of police hat-wearing beasts, without bowing. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the phone screen, the public boiled with rage, but no one noticed the real winner laughing smugly behind the scene. The patrol car door slammed shut before Veronica's back could straighten. The harsh clang of the metal lock echoed in her ears like an exclamation mark cutting off the fragile illusion of justice she had held on to for years. The back seat of the police car was freezing, smelling of old leather mixed with disinfectant and the rusty iron scent of the handcuffs, still locking her wrists. Outside, a few remaining mocking laughs were swallowed by the engine's roar as the patrol car left the lot, sliding into the night, soaked with smoke and mist. LaRouge sat in the front driver's seat, gloved hands on the steering wheel, tapping rhythmically like someone savoring a trophy. Occasionally, he glanced at the rearview mirror, raising one eyebrow in a mocking reminder of who really held the reins in this city. Veronica did not respond or blink at him. She turned her head to the window, watching the LED billboards blur backwards, towering buildings like invisible walls trapping her breath inside the cramped car. In her veins, memories of her father surged like a looping black and white film stuck on one scene. A thin man with tired eyes, hands tied behind his back, dragged out of the house under the scorching noon sun. The braided-hailed child sitting on the doorstep screamed hoarsely, while the neighbor's whispers tore apart her mother's desperate pleas. Now, that child had become the woman sitting in the police car, also handcuffed, also sentenced, before having a chance to defend herself. The crackling radio interrupted the memories. "Command post, this is Unit 38, confirming escort of suspect Veronica Hayes, suspected possession and distribution of illegal substances." Each syllable from the speaker sliced through her ear like a thin blade, carving humiliating words onto the lawyer's badge she once cherished as a talisman. A tear welled up but did not fall, staying locked in the corner of her eye, to fuel the heat of her hatred. The car slowly stopped in front of the police station gate. Spinning red and blue lights cast swirling purple and green reflections on the car window and then onto Veronica's cheek, transforming the face of a justice fighter into the image of a carefully labeled criminal. The car door opened again, rough police hands ready to drag her out. The moment her foot touched the concrete, she told herself, "This is not the end. You will rise again. They will fear your name once more." But beneath the flashing lights, her shadow cast on the station yard remained the shadow of handcuffs, small, trembling, soaked in the shame of a brand new stain stamped onto her. The interrogation room was as cold as a forgotten freezer, lacking any artificial light. The old metal table bore dents, and the harsh fluorescent ceiling light shone directly on Veronica's face, casting her shadow sprawling under the metal chair. A surveillance camera hung in the corner, its black lens like the rusty eye of an ancient predator, sharp enough to see through the helplessness of the person being questioned. The police officer in charge of the report was very young, his shoulder badge still pristine, reading the legal clauses, slowly and carefully, as if fearing a single misplaced word would bring trouble. He sat opposite her, holding a sheet of notes but frequently glancing at the camera, then back to Veronica, who sat with crossed arms, the handcuffs dangling on one side like a reminder that her power was gone. Veronica leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but cutting like a blade. "I demand to see my private lawyer, and I demand you right now to extract the supermarket parking lot camera footage from last night. Everything will become clear." The officer swallowed dryly. Penn paused for a second, his lips moving. I will submit a request to the higher-ups, Miss Hayes. I'm only following procedure." Veronica gave a faint, bitter smile, her eyes hardening. The harsh light reflected off her face, removing any sign of fatigue and replacing it with pure disdain for the cowardice pretending to wear a mask of fairness. She emphasized every word. "Procedure? You know I am being framed. You know the cameras will clear me. Don't make me put your name in the criminal report when this goes to court." The steel door behind the young officer suddenly creaked open with a heavy clatter. A cold breeze slipped through the gap, but was quickly overwhelmed by the smell of cigarettes and the stench of rotten power. LaRouge entered, his uniform neat, hands in his pockets, a crooked smile drawing a dark line on his lip. Did not look at Veronica immediately, just tapped lightly on the young officer's shoulder, his deep voice enough to crush all the subordinates' credibility. "Get out. Let me ask Lawyer Hayes a few private questions." The young officer stood up, his shoulders trembling slightly, eyes flickering towards Veronica as if wanting to say something, but quickly lowering his gaze and disappearing outside, the door clicking shut behind him. LaRouge leisurely sat in the chair opposite, leaning back, eyes drifting to the ceiling like someone enjoying a final hunt song. Then he slowly tilted his head, eyes scanning the corner camera before locking onto Veronica's, lips curling faintly. "Camera? Oh, Hayes. Rainy night. Old supermarket system. Signal loss is normal. Do you think you're smarter than us?" Veronica clenched her teeth, her cuffed hands slightly moving, the chains clinking sharply. She answered firmly, "I have the right to request the original evidence be made public, and you know that well, LaRouge." But the only response she got was a mocking laugh. The experienced officer's eyes glittered with menace, while the internal camera system kept rolling, recording a predator teaching its victim how to die silently, all under the name of law enforcement. Veronica was led out of the interrogation room, down a damp hallway smelling of old paint and thick tobacco stains on the walls. With each step, the small glass panes of guard rooms reflected her face, half hidden in dim tube light, half appearing like a streak of dried blood on the lawyer's badge, torn to shreds in the eyes of the public. They stopped before a solitary jail cell door. The young officer, the one who took the interrogation report, glanced quickly at Veronica with an unspoken meaning, but was abruptly nudged by LaRouge and ordered out to the hallway post. Outside the station, a former colleague of Veronica's, who had worked with her on public corruption trials, tried to negotiate with the duty officer to see her for a few minutes. He carried a prosecutor's authorization and spoke firmly. but the wooden door slammed shut in his face like a cold slap. "She is under investigation. No contact allowed." In front of the station, his shadow mingled with a crowd of reporters and a few gossiping paparazzi joking about the humiliating fall of a black lawyer who thought she could loudly fight corruption. Meanwhile, in a security monitoring room, the flickering ceiling light illuminated an IT technician wearing a temporary badge. His trembling hands placed the supermarket camera's hard drive on the inspection table. The computer screen showed error codes, but before the data extraction could complete, a man in a dark suit, one of LaRouge's superiors, appeared behind him. The man placed a large hand on his shoulder, squeezing lightly. "You have a good contract and a lovely family. Don't be too curious. Got it?" With that, the hard drive was immediately pulled out, resealed with an old fake stamp, then vanished from the storage shelf as if it never existed. The young officer, the only witness to Veronica demanding camera access, sat motionless in the guard room. In his hand was a report boldly stating, "Parking area cameras lost signal due to storm, data unrecoverable." His fingers trembled in spasms as he tried to fold the paper, then unfold it as if searching for a place to write the truth. But a call from the hallway made him jump up, the paper silently falling at his feet. In the jail cell, Veronica sat still on the cold iron bed, back against the wall, eyes wide open as if staring through the mottled brick wall all the way to the station yard outside. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. They are afraid, so they must erase the evidence. Only when afraid does the predator reveal its claws. The yellow light bulb hanging above flickered, casting a speckled glow on her pale cheekbones. The night was long, but in that darkness, her mind began to piece together the first backbone fragments to build her own fierce beast. This time, no one would erase the traces again. Hashtags bearing the name Veronica Hayes began flashing on thousands of phone screens just hours after she was handcuffed against the hood of her own car. Social media exploded like a wildfire carried by the wind. The clip of her being twisted by the police, along with a plastic bag that LaRouge held up like a dirty trophy, was neatly edited and replayed across tabloid news channels all night long. The image of a black female lawyer, her face held high, but wrists locked in steel cuffs, became clickbait, squeezed between shocking celebrity news and love scandals to attract advertising revenue. As the clip hit 1 million views, several anonymous accounts appeared one after another, posting long, meticulously detailed texts as if prepared in advance. They called Veronica a two-faced lawyer, hypocrite, fighting corruption with one hand while counting dirty money from drug trafficking with the other. The public eagerly clung to every word, sharing it like throwing salt, pushing the truth aside like an unwanted trash they hadn't bothered to verify. Some sensational news outlets flashed headlines in bright red letters. Shock. Lawyer Hayes arrested for possession of banned substances. Justice or a trick? Their reports only replayed the footage of her being handcuffed, cutting out her protests and ignoring the images of LaRouge searching the trunk without a warrant. They turned her into a cautionary tale. Do not trust anyone wearing a suit standing on the courtroom platform shouting about fairness. Underneath these posts, black community groups began to stir and fracture. A small group boldly defended Veronica, insisting she was set up and pointing out inconsistencies in the arrest report. But those voices were lost amid a sea of fearful, anxious comments. One user wrote, "She made it a big deal and now is dragging the whole black community down with her. Who would trust her?" This comment was pinned at the top, likely promoted by paid ads, so it would appear repeatedly everywhere. To legitimize all speculation, late at night a police spokesperson appeared live on air. The young man, wearing a neat cap and with a fresh face but speaking clearly like a programmed robot, said, "We are clarifying the incident involving Ms. Veronica Hayes. No conclusions can be drawn yet, but preliminary evidence appears very unfavorable for this lawyer. We urge the public to remain calm and trust the transparent investigation process. A closing sentence, soft as silk but tight enough to tighten the noose around the victim's neck. Another turn. As night slipped toward dawn, a vile comment rose to the top, repeated like a dark chant. A black person who does not know their place will sooner or later return to the mud. This phrase spread like oil, carving a harsh line between those who still believed in justice and the bloodthirsty crowd eager to judge. And although Veronica was still unaware, the spark of defamation had caught fire, a calculated, preemptive strike to leave her no ground to stand on by the time dawn broke. The fluorescent light tube in the prison cell flickered a few times, then held steady, casting a pale yellow streak on the concrete floor. Veronica sat close to the corner of the iron bed, head leaning against the wall, eyes open despite it being past midnight. The TV noise from the waiting room outside trickled through the cell door gap, just enough for her to catch the broadcaster's voice recycling old footage. The lawyer, once famous for anti-corruption lawsuits, now faces serious charges. Police are coordinating with relevant parties to clarify. The noise didn't pierce her ears as sharply as the new comments, clearly etched in her mind as if she were rewinding all the defamatory posts on her phone screen before losing the right to hold it. A young police officer, perhaps moved, secretly handed her the internal office phone for a single call. She turned her face to the wall, speaking in a low, steady voice when the other end picked up. "It's me, Hayes. Listen carefully. All the files I sent before must stay exactly where they are. Lock the safe and change the password today. And Daniel, he must live no matter what." The assistant lawyer's voice was hoarse from lack of sleep, obedient but with worry she could not hide. "Veronica, outside they're tearing you apart already. The bots are spamming posts. I can't block them in time." She clenched her hands, nails scraping the rusty edge of the bed frame, whispering sharply, "Let them be. The more it hurts, the more they reveal their fingerprints. Your job is to bind the evidence for me, the dirty media network. I will tear it apart with my own hands." Hanging up, Veronica dropped the phone to the floor, her breath fading but her eyes blazing with terrifying clarity. In her mind, the invisible details that outsiders could not see were clear. Accounts posting identical texts, scattered comments repeating a long slanderous phrase, an abnormal spike in likes. The hand of hired bots, well known from past media purges she had exposed for others. Now, it was tightening its grip on her. The TV outside switched to a newscast, pushing her name to the end of the brief report like a stain to gain a few last shares before netizens threw another bait. She closed her eyes, tilting her head against the cold concrete wall, lips pressed into a thin smile. Thought slid through like a knife scraping flesh. They think if they turn me into a puddle of mud, I will drown. No, I will turn this puddle into an arena they cannot escape. The entire cell sank into darkness, as silent as a dead lake's surface. Only Veronica's tense veins stood out, twitching like a drawn bowstring ready to snap. Amid the old concrete rubble, a counterattack was quietly building, slowly but surely, and it would not let the predators wipe their mouths clean by dawn. Elena never imagined that a simple selfie video taken while waiting for the bus would turn her into the most important piece in a story that the entire city was buzzing about. That evening, she stood shivering beside a flickering streetlight pole, her shoulder pressed against her backpack, giggling with a friend on the other end of the phone, while adjusting the camera angle. The video background captured her laughter, the light drizzle, and the sweeping headlights of a passing truck. No one noticed the young man, wearing a baseball cap, lurking between parked cars, picking the lock of a dark sedan's trunk, hurriedly stuffing a plastic bag inside, and speeding away on a motorcycle into the darkness. He passed through Elena's camera frame for only a few seconds, enough to turn her innocent clip into a spark that ignited the truth. Back in her cramped apartment, Elena collapsed onto her bed, replaying the video to adjust the filter. It was then she noticed the shadowy figure, the vague movement, yet too clear to ignore. Her heart pounded like a drum, fingers trembling as they hovered over the delete button. At 25 years old, she had never touched anything related to the law, nor did she have the courage to drag herself into trouble with the police. She took a deep breath, but did not press delete. The next day, and the day after, social media exploded. News about Veronica Hayes, the name Elena had only vaguely known as a rather tough black female lawyer, now appeared across groups everywhere. Handcuff clips, slanderous posts, vicious comments. In Elena's mind, her few seconds of video replayed repeatedly like a dull knife stuck deep in her chest. He conjured dozens of reasons to stay silent. "I'm just a passerby. The police will handle it. The press will handle it. Who would believe me if I spoke out?" But every time she saw Veronica's face, held high among a crowd aiming cameras, those eyes seemed to look straight through the screen and ask, "Are you going to stay silent too?" Elena lived alone in a rented apartment with peeling ceilings and crooked windows, overlooking a street full of trucks and a grocery store open all night. She was no hero, had no backing, and was not smart enough to foresee a safe move. But tonight, with her phone fully charged, the clip copied to a hidden folder, and the news about Veronica trampled so thoroughly there was no clean ground left for her to cling to, Elena had only two choices: erase all traces or hit send. Her hands trembled, nails leaving white marks on the touchscreen. Outside, the street was silent except for the pizza shop lights reflecting on the mist. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold window frame, eyes half closed, wondering if she stayed silent, an innocent person would be buried alive. And what kind of life could a normal person like her live from this day forward, with a cowardly stain etched in her heart? In the darkness, her phone screen lit up once again. Below the email subject line, the cursor blinked. To Veronica Hayes, legal representative. Elena's finger froze over the send button, shaking like the last leaf of the season, needing only one strong breath to fall. Elena did not sleep all night. She sat hunched on the edge of the bed, her laptop screen shining brightly on her red-rimmed eyes from reading and rereading the same sentence. "If you send it, you will be exposed. If you don't, someone will die unjustly." Her fingers moved across the keyboard, creating a new email account with a meaningless username and a password so long she had to write it down before tearing the paper into pieces. The short clip was renamed with a lifeless string of numbers. Each keystroke felt like tearing a soft piece of her liver, a dull pain that eased little by little. Before the email content box, she blocked all intentions of rambling. She typed only one sentence, short, like a knife severing the rope of conscience that had bound her for days. "I cannot let her die unjustly. Please use this properly." The cursor blinked impatiently, urging her on. She pressed send at exactly 2:17 a.m. The sent notification ding echoed in the small room. Elena exhaled sharply, her hands trembling as she rested them on the keyboard for a long moment, making sure there was no turning back. She carefully cleared the cache, logged out of all accounts, unplugged the portable hard drive, and even removed the SIM card from her old phone. No one had taught Elena how to hide traces perfectly, but she knew at least she had to do this, so that tomorrow night, if someone knocked on her door, she could still look them straight in the eye and pretend to be an innocent stray cat. Across the city, inside the police station waiting room, Veronica's assistant lawyer sat slumped in a hard chair, knees propped on a suitcase full of documents, eyes dull from drained patience and hope. His phone buzzed with a new email notification. At first, he was about to ignore it, but then the subject line, "Regarding Veronica Hayes," caught his eye like a needle stabbing his weary brain. He jumped up, opened the attachment, and the clip played with a crackling sound through the small speaker. A shaky frame, a damp, dim night background, then suddenly a clear shot of a young man forcing open a trunk, stuffing a bag inside, and speeding away like a ghost. His hand holding the phone trembled violently. Elena left her boarding house near 3 a.m., riding her old bike, bouncing over potholes along a late-night street spotted with uneven streetlights. The cold wind stung her face. Her hair stuck to her forehead, but her chest felt suddenly unburdened and light. The night shift at the convenience store paid little, but at this moment, standing behind the register, hearing the beep of scanned barcodes, was enough peace for her. In the police station, the assistant lawyer dashed into the hallway, ignoring 3 or 4 suspicious glances from the officers on duty. He gripped his phone tightly, thumb poised over the play button, heart pounding beneath his loose tie. He whispered, as if unleashing hatred onto an invisible line, "Veronica, this time we won't drown in their mud anymore." And he knew, in just a few minutes, the predators would taste blood like never before, a price they had never dared to pay. As soon as the clip from Elena fell into his hands, Veronica's assistant lawyer did not allow himself a moment of hesitation. He printed multiple copies, accompanied by a brief legal analysis, and sent them to independent news outlets he knew still retained some sense of conscience. At the same time, he powered on an old laptop connected to the weak Wi-Fi in the police station waiting room and personally pressed play to live stream the original video on his personal page, where thousands had believed Veronica was sitting handcuffed, waiting for trial. The screen cast a tired blue light on his face. A short clip, barely more than 10 seconds, shaky and with Elena's shadow partly in the frame, contained a crucial detail sharp as a freshly honed blade. A young man sneaking around, looking left and right, prying open a trunk, stuffing in a plastic bag, then speeding away. There was no background music, no editing. Raw, genuine, and enough to shatter the narrative that Lawyer Hayes was hiding contraband that the dirty media had been spreading like garbage for days. Only 1 hour after the original clip went live, some of the most reputable newspapers took the opportunity to change direction. Headlines shifted tone, banners flashed. Was Hayes set up? Video exposes the dirty plot behind the handcuffs. In the comments sections, netizens flooded in, piecing together facts. The vehicle search report lacked a warrant, supermarket cameras lost signal, and now the clear video surfaced. Groups that once loudly accused Veronica of hypocrisy split into 2 factions. Some fell silent and disappeared, others flipped their stance, rallying with the hashtag Justice for Hayes, as if they had never slandered her. African-American community groups vigorously shared the clip, demanding LaRouge explain himself. Some accounts that aggressively spread fake news suddenly vanished, their old posts wiped overnight as if they had never existed. But everyone knew nothing truly disappears online. In another corner, a police spokesperson hurried on to a live broadcast, sweat pouring beneath a thick layer of makeup, repeating the scripted words. "We are investigating further. The public is urged to remain calm." Behind him, the hashtag Justice for Hayes climbed trending charts, sparking a storm of shares, comments, and tags of human rights organizations, prominent lawyers, and sleepless journalists. In the police station hallway, the assistant lawyer sat against the wall, eyes sunken from exhaustion. He gently touched his chest and forced a smile so strained his cheekbones ached. The storm was far from over, the traps still cunning, but at least the ship named Veronica Hayes had turned its bow, steering away from the muck, at least in the public's eyes. He knew this time the pack of predators would struggle to swallow the blood they had stirred themselves. Television stations that once edited the clip of Veronica's handcuffs and aired it during prime time were now forced to replay the original video, inserting it into breaking news segments to avoid being exposed by netizens for hiding evidence. The national news ticker hurriedly ran the message. "New video raises suspicion that Lawyer Hayes was framed." The reporter's voice trembled slightly but maintained a solemn tone, no one daring to loudly admit they had silenced public opinion for days. Online, the audience shifted from shock to anger. Defamatory posts about Veronica resurfaced, fake news spam accounts were traced and exposed, and cybersecurity experts joined forces to reveal dirty bots. A series of tabloid fan page admins removed posts, closed comment sections, some locked pages, then changed names and fled. But netizens took only minutes to track down every trace cached online. Community groups switched their tone as fast as flipping cards, turning justice for Hayes into a rallying cry, demanding the dirty plot be uncovered. In the dark corner of the office, LaRouge paced like a beast about to be trapped. The sound of pounding fists on the table echoed like hammer blows. He growled orders to deploy more forces to block all information channels, threatened to withdraw evidence and suppress anyone who dared speak out, but the atmosphere among his subordinates began to thin. Some eyes avoided his gaze, some heads bowed, whispering behind his back. In each mind a painful question crept in: if this breaks, will I become the scapegoat instead of him? In the jail cell, the assistant lawyer seized a moment when the guard was inattentive and slipped a phone through the bars, replaying the clip for Veronica. The small screen was bright enough to reveal the face of the man who had set the trap, enough for the cold light to catch a slow smile curling at Veronica's lips. Her eyes were bloodshot, red veins marking the dark pupils like sparks cutting through a storm. The young man opened the trunk, stuffed the goods inside, then sped away, the rough image now a weapon no one could extinguish. Veronica stared for a long time, her lips moving slightly as if murmuring a silent vow only she could hear. The assistant lawyer gently squeezed her shoulder through the bars, exhaling a phrase loud enough to hear. This storm will sweep them away before they can pull another string. Outside the police station, reporters swarmed like disturbed bees. Microphones raised high, cameras flashing, voices calling out interview requests mixed with angry demands to reveal the identity behind LaRouge. The hashtag Justice for Hayes covered news feeds on every platform. In that moment, the humiliating shackles Veronica wore for nights became a wave, pushing back the pack of predators into the storm's eye where they had no escape. And this time, justice not only bearing her name, but also the blood, not yet dry from her father's years ago, was finding its rightful path. The atmosphere outside the police station early in the morning was no longer the silent courtyard filled with cigarette smoke from tired officers as usual. Instead, it was a forest of microphones, cameras, handheld banners, and chants of "Justice for Hayes" echoing in layers. Reporters clutched notebooks, eyes glued to the tightly closed iron door, ready for the moment someone would burst it open with breaking news. They would be the first to shoot, like cannon fire. Inside, LaRouge sat behind a cluttered desk, the swivel chair that once symbolized his power, now creaking under his frustrated lean backward. The summons and detention order lay straight in front of him, the superior signature in bright red like a blood stain cutting through the ambition for power he had once believed was untouchable. He shouted at the internal affairs investigator reading the order, "Do you think you can chain me so easily? I say one word and your bosses will fall too." "No way!" His mouth threatened and his finger pointed, but his eyes faltered, glancing at the silent subordinates standing like statues. No one dared to look him in the eye. A few sneaked back to the corner, deleted messages on their phones, hastily put away files, burying the connections he had once bragged about protecting. When the cold handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists, LaRouge struggled like a fierce dog dragged out of its kennel. The sound of the cuffs clicking dryly stripped away the last piece of authority he wore like armor over his uniform. In the hallway, a few rookies looked at each other, swallowed hard, thinking of the dozens of times they had bowed to the man now handcuffed like an ordinary prisoner. Outside the station gate, the crowd erupted as the door opened like fire catching gasoline. Banners rose high, phones even higher, and questions rained down like hailstones. "Mr. LaRouge, who is behind you? Are there accomplices? Hayes is innocent, right?" Each question was a blade exposing the shiny mask he had worn on TV while declaring his efforts to protect city order. LaRouge was flanked by two internal affairs officers, pushed through the crowd, his shoulders straightened to avoid cameras capturing a broken beast. But his face was beyond saving, the twitching wrinkles around his mouth, eyes darting desperately for an invisible dark corner to hide in. Flashbulbs popped like ghost fireworks, mocking him, following him down the stained concrete hallway. The iron door slammed shut behind him. Beyond it, the microphone still roared. Veronica's face had yet to appear, but the chant, "Justice for Hayes," already closed every escape route for him and the unnamed figures behind the scenes. Veronica stepped out from the damp, musty steel door of the police station like a shadow slipping out from the bottom of an abyss. Slender, hair disheveled, wrists still marked with red stains from antiseptic, but her chin was raised high, her eyes steady without a trace of tremble. The forest of microphones surged as soon as they saw her figure. The clicking of cameras, voices pushing through to shout questions, the chorus of hashtag Justice for Hayes breaking the damp morning air into pieces. The assistant lawyer stood right behind her, gripping a thick file, its spine stamped and signed, in a way only those who have quietly overturned cases could understand the true value of. He whispered, "They are ready to listen to you. Don't let them leave empty-handed." Veronica nodded softly, drew a cold breath deep into her lungs, then tilted forward to step into the sea of microphones. Her voice was not loud, but shattered into 100 fragments, echoing through the silent crowd holding its breath. LaRouge is just a small piece. The real puppet master still wears a police badge and sits on a much higher throne of power. I will name him if you still want justice to call out its true name. Like a reflex, every microphone pointed directly at her mouth. Questions fired like a summer thunderstorm. Who? Do you have a name? Is it LaRouge's new boss in the district who worked with him? Who will you sue? The crowd pushed forward. Reporters jostled for position. Some Hayes supporters raised banners above their heads, chanting her name as if calling the name of someone who had died and then survived. The assistant lawyer stepped up, holding the thick file high, his face taut but his eyes sharp as a blade. This file is a backup of the cases LaRouge handled neatly. It includes the list of disappeared people and the high-ranking officials who approved the cover-ups. From today, we will submit everything to the court. Veronica glanced over his shoulder, her eyes skimming the cold, hard file cover, then returned to the crowd like a slash, exposing the belly of the traitor, still hiding behind the door. She spoke slowly, each word hardening like thin steel. I will make sure justice is no longer a joke for the rotten. In that instant, camera shutters screamed again, dozens of questions swallowed by scattered applause that grew into waves. Veronica stood motionless amid the storm of flashing lights, her shoulders no longer those of a woman wearing handcuffs, but those of a knife drawn from its sheath, ready to cut through the filth she had once mistaken for the law's shield. Behind her, the microphones still pointed like swords, but this time she did not dodge. The battle had just begun, and this time the blood would flow to the side that must be cleansed. LaRouge was held in solitary confinement in a freezing interrogation room, completely isolated from the outside world, with only the smell of sweat and the ticking of a clock remaining. He sat perched on a metal chair, his wrists still marked from handcuffs, his head slightly raised, lips curled in a contemptuous smile as Veronica entered with a lawyer and an independent inspector. Under the yellow light, his eyes blazed with hatred, mixed with a hint of triumph, as if being caught meant nothing because he had someone backing him from the shadows. At first, LaRouge maintained a fierce demeanor, his voice dripping with scornful sarcasm, denying all accusations and blaming everything on so-called verbal orders from superiors, whose names he refused to reveal. Veronica was not swayed by his provocative attitude. She sat quietly, flipping through the files before him, her voice steady as she asked questions that seemed simple, but trapped LaRouge in a web of self-exposed contradictions. When Veronica gently pushed a set of documents copied from an internal hard drive towards him, something he believed had been completely destroyed, LaRouge's face faltered. His hand twitched, and his mouth weakly denied it. Veronica did not rush to pressure him. She leaned forward and spoke in a deeper tone as she mentioned her father, recounting how he was falsely accused and his honor shattered by a few forged words in a fake report, signed carelessly by people like LaRouge. She emphasized that he was no different from the rats of the past, hiding behind badges to kill the honor and lives of others while boasting himself as an enforcer of justice. Her words were sharp and steady, stripping away his arrogant facade to reveal the trembling face beneath the skin of a powerful man. At first, LaRouge cursed, but as he was cornered, his voice became hoarse, his eyes constantly darting to the inspector taking notes. Finally, in a moment of silence that filled the room, he bowed his head and with a rasp like a hiss through clenched teeth, admitted he was just a henchman, paid by a group wanting to silence troublesome seeds, referring to Veronica herself. He inadvertently revealed a name whispered for years in power corridors, a hidden committee made up of several top police chiefs and prosecutors who had once patted him on the back as protection. Veronica showed no satisfaction. She quietly pressed the record button, her gaze piercing through his criminal mask, no longer angry but calm, as if the curtain hiding the first layer of secrets had been pulled back, without the need for guns or knives. Immediately after the interrogation, Veronica did not return to the law office as usual, but quickly gathered her personal lawyer and a few trusted associates in a private meeting room inside an old building where she used to exchange sensitive documents. On the whiteboard, a relationship map began to form from the names LaRouge had exposed, each red arrow pointing directly to the highest position in the police department, connected to the name of a notoriously tight-lipped deputy prosecutor, extending to several businessmen holding multi-million-dollar construction contracts for the city. Each underlined line was a new knot, overlapping old financial files that Veronica's father had quietly saved before his death. The more they examined, the more chilling it became to realize this network had silently existed for decades, turning power into a shield and law into a tool to pave the way and silence anyone daring to speak out. Veronica silently stared at the papers plastered all over the wall, her mind spinning from the layers of conspiracy. She knew they had just peeled the surface, but what awaited them would not only be threats of lawsuits, but real dangers to life. While the group discussed how to dig deeper without revealing any weaknesses, Veronica's phone rang. It was an unknown number. No ID showing. The voice was hoarse and distorted by a voice-changing app, uttering a few brief sentences. "They know LaRouge has confessed. They will not let you live to expose this. The evidence will be destroyed tonight. Protect your people, or everything will disappear with you." The line was cut abruptly, leaving the room heavy with tension as everyone realized that all careful calculations were now meaningless. Veronica clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her skin without pain. In her mind flashed the image of her father lying motionless behind bars, his eyes never yielding even in wrongful death. She exhaled deeply and then decisively ordered that all vulnerable leads must be blocked immediately, while preparing a quick press conference. If the enemy wanted to silence her, she would use public opinion as a shield, releasing part of the documents enough to make them hesitate if they still wanted to cover up the scandal. Late afternoon, stepping out of the iron door of the police headquarters, Veronica looked up at the sky of New York, thick and black as spilled ink. The cold wind whipped through her hair, carrying a silent vow. This battle would no longer be defensive. The old shield of justice would be sharpened into a sword, and she herself would expose the ghost of power in the light. In that moment, amid the packed traffic and the dim streetlights, New York fell silent, leaving a lion to quietly roar and stir in the darkness once more. The five-story building, painted silver gray, stood silently amid the old office district. By day, it was merely a front for a trading company, but at night it transformed into a refuge for dark dealings. The entrance was tightly guarded, with security personnel in black suits checking ID cards and thoroughly inspecting phones to ensure no one carried recording devices. Inside, on the third floor, a dimly carpeted room featured a long table with 7 chairs spaced deliberately so that no one could meet another's gaze for too long. Each eye contact bred suspicion. A man sat at the head of the table, his uniform stripped of name tags, but the folds on his shoulders still marking his power. He slammed down a dossier printed with news about LaRouge, his voice deep and thick with suppressed anger, filling the air heavy as cigarette smoke. No one dared to clear their throat. The deputy prosecutor near the window was the first to lose patience. He grabbed a newspaper showing a photo of Veronica leaving the police station and threw it on the table, cursing the unraveling situation. LaRouge should have been eliminated first. Now he's barking everything out. A businessman with a neat face but moist eyes tapped his fingers on the table, lowering his voice to suggest, "We pay her off. Offer a state advisory position whose lawyer's mouth can't be sealed with money." The others sneered. One waved a hand dismissively. "You think she's like those puppet lawyers? That woman gets louder when she smells money." The mood sank as the short man sitting at the far end, who had remained silent until then while watching every tense face, finally looked up and spoke in a hoarse voice like scraping metal. "Money can't buy it. Honor can't be bought. Then we clean up. Clean until there's not a single last word left." He lifted a folder of address maps, the bright red stamps on the corners of the papers looking like pre-stamped death warrants. His words sparked a fierce argument. Someone slammed their hand on the table in protest, warning that violence now would be a double-edged sword, provoking media frenzy and pulling the FBI into a deeper investigation. But the leader sat quietly, twirling a fountain pen, watching the yellow light cast his shadow onto the conference table. He exhaled softly, as if releasing smoke, and growled, "If she lives, we lose everything. Power, money, freedom. Do you want to wear orange jumpsuits in prison?" Those words choked off all resistance. In the dark carpeted room, everyone exchanged knowing looks. There was no turning back. Finally, the leader tapped the dossier decisively. "The hard drives, original documents, witnesses. Clean them all. She, an accident before the hearing. Done. No negotiation." A strong hand slid the target list toward the one handling the dirty work. The smell of sweat, old paper, and gunpowder seemed to seep back into the room, lights still on. The ghost of power nodded in agreement, and Veronica's fate was sealed with an unspoken death sentence clearer than any indictment. He was known by a brief name, the Darkness. No files recorded, no portraits kept, and only a few who had hired him ever remembered his true face before disappearing forever. In the stuffy room filled with bitter coffee and burnt cigarette smoke, the Darkness merely shrugged as he accepted a thick stack of papers clipped with addresses, phone numbers, and scheduled resolutions. His voice was hoarse and curt, but sounded like an ice grinder mixed with a cold promise. 3 days, neat, clean, no leaks. A gloved hand lightly spun a silver pen, marking the most important names. Veronica, key target, witness with the clip, secondary paper files and hard drives in the secret safe, priority cleanup. While the Darkness quietly slipped out the back door, at the head of the table, the police commander flipped open a mini radio and ordered the night patrol to switch shifts unexpectedly, disguised as security checks around Veronica's office district. The team wore no bulletproof vests but sharp black suits with earpieces, officially to prevent community unrest over LaRouge's case, but everyone knew they were a mobile ring, ready to find weaknesses and disable any cameras near the file store. A deputy prosecutor sitting nearby, sweating and nervously wiping his collar, stammered, "If this leaks out, the press will tear us apart. The FBI will come down hard on everyone." The leader didn't bother to turn, still twirling his pen, voice chillingly indifferent. "Once she disappears, no mouths to tell. No storytellers, no stories. The public we bought isn't stupid enough to dig when there's no sensational news." A bald man with a gold chain suddenly interrupted. "But what about the kid who witnessed and filmed the trunk incident? Still alive out there?" The man in charge of dirty work returned with a crooked smile. "Her name's already here. Before dawn, she won't be a problem." The blunt answer sent a chill through the room. In a brief moment, everyone looked at each other like people stepping into a pool of blood, but too afraid to say the word fear. When the clock's hand slid past 12, the host folded the dossier and stood. The handshake was cold and brief, with only one sentence. "Tonight, it ends clean. No applause, no cheers, as if closing a lucrative deal, just the sound of papers shuffling, pens clicking shut, and leather shoes gliding on the carpet, shadows dispersed, carrying lists of addresses stamped with death marks. Outside the frosted glass door labeled Meeting Room, Trading and Service Company, the narrow hallway stretched like a crocodile's gut, swallowing the fading footsteps. Inside the room remained only human warmth and the thick smell of cold coffee, the sole evidence that a conspiracy had just been born, beginning the countdown to Veronica's execution. The sign on the door closed like a coffin lid, plunging the city into a nightmare, unaware of itself. The night in New York was completely silent. Outside the high-rise window, only yellow lights shimmered faintly over scattered files spread across the desk. Veronica sat alone, shoulders slightly slumped after nearly 2 days without sleep, her fingers flipping through dry pages full of text that matched data files waiting to be released to the press. Each line was a noose tightening around those behind LaRouge, but also a spark threatening to burn everything she loved. The sudden ring of the landline phone cut through her thoughts. The screen showed unknown caller. No number, no area code. Veronica hesitated briefly, her hand hovering over the answer button, then decisively picked up. Silence stretched on the other end, only breaths sounding like wind whistling through a crack in a door. Seconds later, a distorted voice, twisted enough to mask age, spoke evenly, without any emotion. "Ms. Hayes, we advise you to hang up. Pack your papers. Forget everything about the files, about LaRouge, about the nonsense hearings you are staging. Otherwise, someone will bleed tonight." Veronica took a deep breath, gripping her pen like a lifeline. Her voice strangely calm. "Who are you? Threats are useless. I will not back down." The voice on the other end remained steady, without a hint of laughter. "Your mother. She is fine. Every morning she walks 3 laps around Oakwood Park, comes home at 8:30, calls you at 10 to remind you to eat breakfast, and tends the small garden in the afternoon. Tonight, the iron gate at her house is slightly loose on its hinges. Listen carefully." Suddenly, the sound of a rattling lock echoed, as if someone was fiddling with an old metal keyhole. The creaking and squeaking noises were followed by a trembling old woman's voice over the phone line, calling Veronica's name. "Veronica, do you hear what your mother is saying?" Veronica's heart pounded as if a hammer was striking her sternum. Her hand covered her mouth, but she could not stifle a broken sob escaping her chest. She shouted into the receiver, "Don't touch her, I warn you," but her threat sounded as helpless as a mosquito drowning in a storm. The distorted voice did not interrupt, but added a harsh sentence, like a nail hammered into a table. 24 hours. Delete the data. Withdraw the lawsuit. Leave New York. Otherwise, the first to bleed will be your mother. A cold, prolonged dial tone ended everything. In the cramped room, the desk lamp still illuminated the unfinished lawsuit signature on a paper. Veronica sat motionless, the phone white in her hand, eyes wide open but seeing nothing beyond the thick darkness covering her mother's house in the suburbs. Outside the window, the wind howled, pounding on the glass like a heartbeat striking the skull from inside, reminding her that every safety boundary she clung to had vanished without a trace. Veronica drove through the night, gripping the steering wheel like the last thread holding onto her sanity. The road to the suburbs seemed endless. The pale yellow streetlights blurred as they receded behind, leaving dense darkness swirling around her head. When the tires grated against the brick path leading to the yard, her heart tightened. The iron gate at her mother's porch was still slightly ajar, but under the weak light fresh pry marks were visible, alongside a bent hinge gouged as if a sharp blade had slowly worked its way in. Inside, the elderly mother trembled, leaning against a wooden chair, eyes still red from fear. Seeing her daughter, she broke into tears, grabbing Veronica's shoulders and stammering the same question repeatedly. "What did they do to me? I don't know anything, do I?" Veronica squeezed her mother's hand, her voice trembling but refusing tears, comforting her like a child, coaxing her to take sedatives and then letting her rest. her head falling asleep on an old wool blanket. Once everything had settled, Veronica went outside to check the cameras hanging on the porch roof, by the gate, and near the old dog kennel. All had been gutted, leaving only plastic shells dangling like useless blind eyes. A chill ran down her spine, extinguishing the faint hope that the phone threat was just an empty bluff. Though the night was not over, Veronica's mind was tangled like a torn spider web. She thought of her father, a kind man who believed in justice until his last moment, only to become a wrongful verdict erased like dust wiped off a powerful table. She wondered, if she continued today, how many drops of blood would be spilled just for a ruling. Her mother, the only remaining family, would she be dragged into this cruel cycle again? A New York associate lawyer called, his voice hoarse over the line. "Veronica, if you insist on going public, at least send your mother to Canada first. I can arrange the papers. Or we stop here, negotiate, save lives." Veronica remained silent at the other end. Never had her heart been so clearly divided, half wanting to drop the case, close everything, and take her mother away from New York, the other half screaming through her veins, reminding her every drop of her father's blood fallen was so she could rise and demand justice in his place. After her mother had fallen into a deep sleep from the medicine, Veronica sat on the cold brick steps on the porch, watching her shadow flicker under the dim moonlight. Insects chirped incessantly, like scratching the persistent unease at the bottom of her soul. She pulled out her phone, trembling briefly before dialing someone she had long avoided. This was an old contact in the federal investigation team, a man who had once owed her father a debt and promised, "I will repay it, even if it costs my entire career." When a hoarse, static-filled male voice answered, Veronica said only one sentence, quieter than the wind: "If I disappear, tell the world the truth." Without waiting for a reply, she hung up, letting the cold seep into her bones, forcing her eyes wide open, no longer shedding tears. In the darkness lit by the porch light, Veronica's eyes no longer showed fear, only fire. This time, she promised herself, even if it cost her last breath, she would bury the shadow of power that had killed her father and nearly crushed justice once again. Veronica had been awake for 3 consecutive nights, flipping through yellowed pages saturated with the musty smell of an old archive. Beneath the bold ink letters were streaks of dried blood, sealed by unknown perpetrators buried in the official reports that the entire city blindly trusted. The backup hard drive sat crooked on the desk, its charging cable draped over a thick document marked with red pen notes. The laptop heated softly beneath her palms. The window cracked open just enough to let in the night air, carrying the scent of gasoline smoke from the avenue below, mingled with the bitter aroma of coffee in her lungs. Outside, streetlights pierced through the curtains, casting a lone yellow beam on the thick dossier, like a stone slab sealing her father's grave for 2 decades without being reopened. She knew that pressing the send button would immediately expose her to the venomous hard drive's snapback. Silence was safety, but the price of silence was her father's blood stamped onto criminal records, was the continued dripping of blood from countless other black children for those beastly figures in uniform to keep draining budgets. Veronica's eyes were glued to the file upload box, her lips barely parting to hiss through clenched teeth like a knife scraping bone. "The price of silence is my father's blood. The price of truth might be my own blood. Choose, Hayes." And she chose. An email was sent, with a compressed PDF file attached, secured so only the recipient could open it. The recipient was Ross Rant, a reporter who had once faced threats for exposing wrongful arrests of black people years before, a man clinging to what little journalistic integrity he had left, and Veronica was betting her life on that little left. In the message, she wrote only one line: "I take full responsibility for the authenticity. If I die before the rest can be published, let this final part bury the whole venomous nest." Ross replied within 4 minutes, Sending you a virtual coffee. I'll run the story tomorrow morning. If I die, we die together." The moment the send button glowed blue, Veronica leaned back in her chair, feeling her spine crack like a coffin lid popping open. But it was fine. That coffin lid would now press down hard on the bastards who hadn't buried her yet. The next morning, as sunlight cracked through the city's glass skyline, the headline, "Lawyer Hayes Reveals Evidence Exposing Polis Corruption Network," flooded every breaking news feed. The hashtag #BloodFiles Justice for Hayes exploded across social media, with netizens abandoning handcuff clips to swarm the original documents. Each transcript, every missing person report, every forged officer's signature revealed beneath the obituary of countless innocent victims. The police station became a hive of chaos. Patrol teams split into factions, some muttering curses at Hayes, others burning old documents, while a few whispered to reporters for credit. The real puppet masters hid behind the oak desks, sending messages, "Silence her. Do not let her open the last file." But the public was no longer silent. Crowds poured into the streets, banners painting the face of LaRouge as arrested, now demanding the heads of higher-ups still hidden. As night fell again over New York, Veronica stood alone on her apartment balcony. Below her, millions of car lights and LED billboards flashed back jagged light streaks. Beneath them, a nest of snakes coiled and twisted, hunting for prey to drag her into darkness. But this time, she was no longer afraid. She whispered, her voice dry as crushed stone, "My blood, my father's blood, in exchange for this light. You trash. Get ready to surface and breathe fresh air." And beyond the night, eyes that once believed justice was a joke began to open wide for the first time. The documents Veronica released went far beyond a few local newspapers, as the corrupt dark forces had once sneered. Overnight, the servers exploded. Original file scans appeared on international forums. Major networks ignited the story like gasoline on fire. Lawyer Hayes exposes corrupt police network in New York. How will the government respond? Live stream channels gathered hundreds of thousands of simultaneous viewers, citizens seeing forged signatures, disappeared testimonies, and the red pen marks Veronica had clawed her hands to bleed, to highlight every suspicious point. The next morning, the downtown streets were drowned in cheers and banners. Justice for Hayes covered every corner. Groups of all skin tones emerged from worn apartments, holding signs demanding a full police department inspection and the mass firing of senior commanders. The remaining honest officers were half hiding, half whispering ways to side with her, because everyone smelled fresh blood if the cover-up continued. Amid the turmoil, a group of young lawyers who had only heard Hayes' name from human rights law seminars lined up at her door, offering their hands. "If you get arrested again, we'll drag those bastards to court with you." Veronica nodded lightly, her eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, but the corners of her mouth lifted a rare smile in the longest night. But the old snakes did not give her a long breath. One night near dawn, when Veronica returned to her apartment, the kitchen light revealed fresh scratches on the doorframe. She carefully inspected the room and discovered a tiny camera hidden behind a wall-mounted mirror, its red light blinking faintly like a demon's eye watching her sleep. Underneath the camera, a single strand of her hair hung across. A whispered message without words, "I know you are breathing." Veronica did not tremble. She mounted her phone on a tripod, adjusted the angle to capture the entire mirror, then started a live stream on the very channel she used to publish the files. Before thousands of live viewers, she tore the mirror off the wall, pulled out the camera, and threw it hard to the floor. Her voice was steady, without a trace of fear. "You like watching me sleep? Fine. From now on, I'll sleep right in front of the whole city's camera. No more spy cams needed." The clip of Veronica exposing the spying device in her own room spread even faster than the initial file release. Public outrage soared. The anti-corruption protesters flooded the streets, burning effigies and spray-painting graffiti on senior commanders' faces. The city boiled like a pot of oil, forcing the authorities to speak on air with a hesitant voice. "We will investigate thoroughly," words falling on the ears of lawyers sharpening lawsuits against the police department to bring it to the federal level. But amidst the crowd's roar, one monster remained hidden, the one who turned LaRouge into a pawn, who forced her father to die in disgrace, still sat behind a sealed oak desk, snapping his fingers to order. Destroy her before she opens the last file. Night once again cloaked the city with the smell of protest smoke and ambulance sirens echoing down main streets. In the corner of her apartment, where the mirror hole was yet to be patched, Veronica sat alone, the desk lamp casting yellow light on scattered papers. Her hand trembled lightly as it touched the last folder, the dossier containing the names of those who buried her father alive, along with dozens of other innocents. Her fingers shook, but her eyes did not. In Veronica's gaze now burned steel amid a sea of threatening messages. "You will have to kill me if you want to silence this entire city." The keyboard clicked sharply. The final words had begun crawling into the light. The morning sun had barely risen when the city was already sealed off in front of New York City Hall by protective barricades and microphones aimed directly at every oak door. Reporters jostled and pushed each other while legal assistants argued to secure front row seats. The LED screen in the square broadcast live, the crowd pressed tightly together, like a swarm of bees holding their breath, waiting for the first sting to pierce the decades-old shell of power that no one dared to touch. Inside the hearing room, the atmosphere was thick and suffocating, as if the room had been sealed shut all winter. The witness bench held only one upright figure, Veronica Hayes. Her wrist still bore the imprint of old handcuffs, tiny blue veins beneath her skin wrapped like steel cords around a scar that would never heal. Her hair was neatly tied, and her dark vest could not hide the hollow shadows under her eyes caused by weeks of sleepless nights. But those eyes, once tearful over her father's corpse, now stared straight ahead like a blade, stripping away the rotten legal facade hanging on the courthouse wall. Whispers echoed from the corner, and the microphone on the witness stand trembled lightly under Veronica's hand as she set down a thick dossier. On its cover, a red seal smeared like fresh blood read, "Hayes File Top Secret." Across the table, the internal investigation team sat in a row, like a freshly whitewashed wall, about to crack apart. Among them were several dark suits, ties tied too tightly, hiding half-angry, half-fearful faces beneath sweat at their collars. Further back, the gallery reeked of cameras and notepads, the spotlight flicking over every blink of Veronica's eyes, as if trying to see if she would falter, standing before the law that once sent her father to his grave. The presiding judge struck his gavel once, the sound echoing over the wooden ceiling before fading into silence, swallowed by the clicking of reporters' keyboards. He looked directly at Veronica, his voice thick like old wood. "The Hayes file has raised questions about investigative procedures and abuse of power by law enforcement agencies. Today's hearing aims to bring the truth to light. All testimonies will be recorded, broadcast live, and protected under federal law." For a brief moment, Veronica scanned the faces, avoiding her gaze. She caught sight of one, the senior commanding officer sitting cross-legged in the front row, his shoulders tensing when their eyes met, fingers fidgeting at his collar, but the reflection from his watch flickered nervously. He once stood over her father, shouting the order to cuff him in the yard, then signed the false statement with a blue pen. Today he sat there amid a sea of microphones, but Veronica knew he no longer had any shield behind him. Her fingers unlocked the dossier case, the metallic click sharp in the air, causing several heartbeats to hitch in the crowded room filled with people and cameras. Veronica inhaled deeply, letting the smell of old paper and ink fill her lungs, letting her father's humiliation dissolve into the last broken chain before the flashbulbs. As the thick stack of papers hit the wooden table, every gaze focused on one person, not the cuffed victim anymore, but a living witness ready to expose the monster's bones before a suffocating city outside. The microphone in front of Veronica crackled as if overloaded. Her assistant lawyer, his vest wrinkled from sleepless nights, stood up, eyes scanning the sea of lenses before turning back to the witness table, voice dry but clear. "Miss Hayes, were the arrest records related to your father and a series of other cases involving people of color systematically altered? Who gave the final approval?" Veronica did not blink. She nodded, pulled out the first document from the thick file, holding it high enough for all cameras to zoom in on every stamp and the red handwriting scraping the paper's edge. Her finger traced the defendant's name, arrest date, and officer's signature. Each stop of her finger pinned down an old wound she had painstakingly uncovered. This is the original report. This is the court submission. Compare the signatures. Clearly copied and pasted, the dates altered by hand. The approver's name is in the lower corner. Please zoom in. Camera. The flashes exploded repeatedly. The laptop keys clattered, shattering the heavy air. In the front row, the senior officer's gold insignia gleamed under the cold light, casting shadows on his increasingly pale face. He crossed his legs and clenched his jaw tightly to prevent twitching under the surrounding lenses. Veronica gave him no pause to breathe. She placed another report with his name clearly matching the approval line. She looked straight at him. "Do you deny that this signature is yours?" The murmurs from the press gallery reached the judge's ears. He tightened his grip on the gavel and tapped the table lightly, but no one cared to quiet down. The officer cleared his throat, hoarse, yet trying to maintain command. I only signed according to procedure. The errors were made by subordinates, LaRouge and a few others, acting on their own. I did not interfere." Veronica snorted a short, sharp laugh like a razor. "You did not interfere? Then listen carefully." She signaled her assistant to play a recording, a crackling voice accompanied by the creaking of an old chair and a deep, rough male voice. "Clean up the Hayes file before morning. LaRouge will take the blame. I don't want to see this mess in the archive anymore." The voice was unmistakably the commander. Inside the hearing room, whispers surged like waves, breaking into curses and shouts that echoed from the hallway like thunder through the wooden beams. The commander waved his hand, mouth opening and closing like a stranded fish, fingers trembling as they gripped the table's edge. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every drop of sweat leaking around his graying temples. The judge struck the gavel 3 times, his voice hoarse from the crowd's roar outside the door. "Order. All evidence will be verified. Witness Hayes, continue with your details." Veronica needed no prompting. She flipped to a new page, her voice steady like hammer blows. "I will show you this file is not complete, and the man sitting there is only a puppet, trembling for the real mastermind." The microphone trembled as the crowd outside demanded more heads to roll. Inside, the true face of the man who once shielded dirty cops was torn apart by the light of justice. He no longer had the strength to conceal. With no escape left, the aging commander hunched his shoulders, eyes glazed before the unblinking lenses. He coughed harshly, lowering his voice to mumble, more to himself than to the public. "Yes, I signed. I ordered the cleanup, but I was only following orders from above. Everyone knows that name. His voice broke into ragged breaths, his wrinkled hand wiping sweat running from his temple to the soaked collar. Behind him, several former subordinates who once obeyed now sat frozen, afraid to meet the camera's gaze. Veronica wasted no more breath yelling. She stood straight and slammed another pile of files on the table, causing the microphone to buzz loudly. Sheets of cold white paper turned, names of the disappeared, verdicts without numbers, a bright red canceled stamp on forensic reports, a filthy paper graveyard hiding real blood. She tilted her head, looking directly at the judge, and paused where the live camera focused. "Each name here is a human life. My father was just one of them. He never came back. But those gatekeepers still sit on velvet chairs, laughing at the victim's disgrace. I swear I will dig to the bone so everyone can see who is really pulling the strings." The judge's voice cut through the room's rising tension with a firm gavel knock. "Based on the testimony and evidence just presented, I hereby order the immediate suspension of all commanding officers involved. The council will demand a federal investigation immediately." A roar from the hallway poured in like a wave crashing through the old tiles of City Hall. Dozens of cameras broadcast live. The trembling old commander, his hands cuffed behind his back by men who were once his comrades. Online, the hashtag Hayes hearing skyrocketed to the top worldwide within half an hour. Comments flooding in. "Arrest all the bastards. Hayes is real justice. Justice isn't blind anymore." Cheers erupted, mingling with sirens and chants outside the square covered with flags and banners bearing Veronica's face beside the words, "She fought for us." Amid the media frenzy and flashing lights, Veronica stood. Her hand gently smoothed the battered dossier creased from hundreds of flips in the dark. Her voice rang out, neither loud nor shouting, but cutting straight to the crowd of suited men still hunched around the witness table. "My father will not live again, but from today you will no longer use Justice's name to bury anyone in the mud." In that moment, the flashing lights captured the face of the black woman once handcuffed in a parking lot, now a thorn no one could break. She stepped down from the witness stand, slipped past the line of guards clearing her path, leaving behind a hearing room that had just buried a few more true faces, and a city beginning to shed its old skin beneath her feet. After the hearing that shook the entire city, Veronica did not return to her old apartment. She and a team of young lawyers were arranged by a trusted acquaintance to stay in a temporary apartment on the eastern edge of Manhattan. The building was old but secured with surveillance cameras all around, triple-layer fingerprint locks on the door, and multiple passwords changing hourly. On the glass table in the living room lay the original dossier, a hard drive containing unaltered scanned copies of all documents, plus a sealed waterproof bag holding the audio file provided by Daniel, all locked at the bottom of a mobile safe. Some members of the group took turns keeping watch, eyes glued to the surveillance monitor, ears plugged into radios like unpaid guards. Veronica sat cross-legged at the work desk by the window, her laptop open, fingers scrolling through each bullet point of the testimony she had prepared for the upcoming trial. The yellow hallway light filtered through the blinds, casting a sharp shadow on her face. Her heart beat steadily, but a cold sting ran down her spine. They lost LaRouge, lost the commander, lost the mask hiding their filth. Their only way out now is to bite me to death to save their rotten carcass. The thought flickered, causing her finger to hesitate on the enter key. The living room hummed with soft voices, rustling papers, and the steady drip of the coffee machine lulling the space. Outside, New York swallowed the cold, damp night air and the sound of sirens washing into the city like waves. No one noticed that just 2 lampposts away from the camera outside the door, a shadowy figure wearing a hoodie stood motionless, head slightly bowed, holding a signal jamming device. With a single snap of the fingers, all red warning lights on the security monitors flickered and then went dead, replaced by connection error messages. Veronica was reviewing the last part of the testimony when a faint clink came from the balcony glass door. She looked up, survival instinct pushing her off the chair just a heartbeat before the glass spider-webbed and shattered into 2, the sound of banging mixed with a strangled shout. "Someone's here!" A young lawyer was struck hard on the back of the head, collapsing beside the bookshelf with papers scattered everywhere. 2 more shadows slipped through the broken door like wild animals squeezing through cracks. In that brief moment, Veronica glimpsed a glinting steel knife and a silenced pistol hidden under a black coat. They neither asked nor threatened. They went straight to the mobile safe, already open, rifling through the files, hard drive, and backup photocopies she had clung to like her lifeline. One growled in a hoarse voice, "I told you, this data must never reach the court." Veronica backed slowly toward the corner of the table, her back hitting the swivel chair, breath shattering like a mirror thrown to the floor. Her hands searched for anything that could become a weapon, but before her eyes the shadow moved past the supposedly impregnable security she once trusted, and the night, rather than shielding her, opened wide to swallow the hope for justice she had fought and bled for over 10 years. A loud crash echoed as the living room door was kicked in again, splintering the wood and breaking the hinges. One of Veronica's teammates, a young lawyer who used to argue only in conference rooms, charged in wielding a fire extinguisher wildly at the shadow rivaling through the papers. A hit landed on the leader's shoulder, staggering him as documents flew like torn white butterflies under the flickering desk lamp. He hissed through clenched teeth mixed with the ripping of paper, "Touch me. You think you can stop me?" Veronica lunged forward, her hand brushing the edge of the still-lit backup hard drive, but before she could pull it from the chaos, a black boot stomped down hard. Plastic cracked. The hard drive popped open. Original data shattered like broken teeth. circuits crackling, then dying instantly. The man shoved her teammate aside, shouting at the lookout by the door, "Silence the snitch, quick!" In the balcony corner, Daniel, the young cop who once risked his life to hand Veronica the recording, cowered behind a torn curtain, trembling, clutching a fruit knife, eyes wild as shadows poured in like rats raiding a grain store. One masked assailant, separated from the chaos, stepped onto the balcony, slapped Daniel down, then pressed the silenced gun barrel to his temple. Daniel struggled, eyes wide, blood dripping from his split lip. I did the right thing. Miss Hayes will—" A dry gunshot swallowed his last words. A spray of red splattered the balcony glass wall, mingling with the cold mist drifting through the broken frame. Veronica froze at the bedroom threshold, her throat tightening so fiercely she couldn't scream. Her eyes caught the moment Daniel fell face down, his hand still clutching the password note for the backup data Veronica had not yet revealed. The assassin retracted his gun, turning to his accomplices with a terse command, "Pull out, leave no trace." The three shadows slipped back through the shattered glass, leapt over the railing like smoke rising from the river's surface, vanishing into the city mist, ready to dissolve with dawn. Inside, shredded papers lay scattered, a blood trail smeared from the balcony door across the gray carpet, the hard drive sparking faintly before dying completely. Veronica collapsed to her knees soaked with Daniel's still-warm blood. Her hand brushed a hair caught on the broken drive, letting out a quiet whisper no one else heard. "My hands are clean. So you come with dirty knives? Fine. This game, I'll tear your hands apart to count every drop of blood." And from the dark corner, a cold metallic sound hissed through the broken glass, signaling a hunt far longer than anyone had predicted. Police sirens and flashing blue and red lights arrived late like a cheap joke, draping over Daniel's still-warm body. The safe apartment had become a bloody crime scene, torn papers littering the floor, the safe left wide open, the hard drive crushed like a tin can underfoot. Several officers awkwardly strung yellow tape, took photos and wrote reports, but dared not meet Veronica's eyes. The woman still kneeling by Daniel's body, hand resting on his back, blood-stained fingers dry, as if she had lost the ability to cry long ago. A young officer trembled, holding an evidence bag, voice barely a whisper. "Ms. Hayes, we will investigate. No fingerprints remain. Cameras outside were disabled." His sentence trailed off as Veronica remained silent, bowing her head, lips nearly touching Daniel's hair. "Sorry. I'll turn your blood into a dagger to stab those bastards, I swear." Outside the building, reporters swarmed like flies drawn to carrion, surrounding the iron gate, flashing cameras at upper-floor windows. Breaking news headlines blared across 24-hour channels. Hayes file breached, witness dead, evidence compromised, case shaken. Thousands of comments tore each other apart. Some cursed Veronica's incompetence for losing documents, others shouted slogans demanding justice, while others cursed the dirty cops with no heads yet to fall. Inside the blood-stained living room, the young lawyer team who once guarded vigilantly now scattered into shadowy figures, curled against the walls, one or two shaking as they called family, some slipping away quietly, slipping bags past the police tape like mice avoiding traps. Only a few eyes held terror mixed with an unextinguished fire. Veronica rose from Daniel's body, palms dry and bloodied, but nails digging into flesh still refusing to let go. She gathered torn paper fragments and broken hard drive pieces, wrapping them carefully in a blood-stained cloth bag. The sound of police boots echoed sharply on the stained floor. Someone placed a hand on her shoulder to comfort her, but she brushed it away, eyes rimmed with blood beneath dark purple shadows. Through the broken balcony glass, New York still glowed with lights, still sounded with sirens and LED billboards selling hope cheaply to those who believed justice was a commodity. Veronica looked at that city as if staring into the grave where her father had once been buried under lies. Her mouth opened, voice hoarse like grinding stone. "You think killing the witness, burning the files, ends this? I will expose everything, I swear." A young lawyer silently raised a phone, recording her standing amid the torn papers, blood, and flashlight beams. That faint clip needed no effects, just one fierce vow, and social media was ready to explode once more. The kindling was ready. Veronica knew she had just lit it, the blood of her own teammate. After the bloody night, the temporary apartment became a sealed crime scene, forcing Veronica and her group of lawyers to relocate to a shabby law office hidden among the dusty commercial blocks in Brooklyn. The shutters were half closed. Inside, the pale white fluorescent lights cast on faces drained from sleeplessness, while the smell of old coffee mixed with disinfectant hung like the fading breath of the entire group. Veronica sat in a corner, back against the wall, head slightly bowed, her hands rubbing the swollen scratch on her arm, the bruise from last night's break-in still oozing bluish blood beneath the skin. The remaining documents were just a few blurred, scanned pages, with some notes Daniel had left before his head was crushed against the railing. The assistant lawyer flipped through them repeatedly, whispering curses. Another member withdrew that very night, taking a laptop with backup files and disappearing with a hint. "Heather Hayes, I have a wife and kids. I can't take this anymore." Amid the chaos, Veronica said nothing. She only stared at her old phone screen, her thumb scrolling through the string of messages Daniel had sent. "Trust me, this time it will definitely be done." And he had stayed behind on the bloodstain, not yet dry. Close to 1 a.m., when the team briefly dozed off from exhaustion, Veronica's email inbox suddenly received a new message. No subject, just a single line of exactly 12 words. "I have the part you haven't reached yet. Meet me at 3 a.m. in basement B3 of the Hoover Hotel." No phone number, no signature, no attachments. She read it 3 times, her eyes shifting from weary dullness to cold steel. In her mind, half a voice warned, "Trap." The other half replied, "The best trap is the one you know about but still step into." She folded her phone, zipped up her coat, and quickly slid a tiny folding knife into her bra, a steel edge that had accompanied her since the day her father was handcuffed in front of the cheering police. A young lawyer just woke and started to ask, "Miss Hayes, where are you going?" But Veronica slipped past like a shadow, leaving no answer. The glass door of the office closed behind her, swallowing all the chaotic sounds inside. Outside, New York still had light drizzle, thin mist wrapping the street lamps into blurry halos, like a bloodstain wiped hastily on tiled pavement. In Majan, Veronica walked slowly along the empty street, hearing her shoes hit the wet road. Every step marked the beat of unanswered questions. Who? What is in the USB? And this time, will I kill or be killed? No security lights, no followers, no bodyguards. Just a thin figure wrapped in a dark coat, hiding a small knife inside as a final reminder. If it's a trap, I'll fight back to the end. And the New York ahead, a bottomless pit, opened wide as every night before, ready to swallow anyone daring enough to expose it to light. Basement B3 of the Hoover Hotel exuded the distinctive damp smell of old concrete never repainted. Rows of cars were parked unevenly, some covered in dust, some still warm from running engines. The ventilation fan screamed sharply. Scattered fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting Veronica's shadow 3 times her height as she stepped deeper into the cold concrete pillars. She heard no other footsteps, but a blood-honed instinct told her someone had been standing there silently, like a cutout against the gray pillar. A man wearing a baseball cap pulled low, and a black coat with the collar raised to hide most of his cheekbones. He tilted his head when she stopped about 3 meters away, his voice low, hoarse, but calm. "Lawyer Hayes, stand there. Hands in your pockets. I don't want to die tonight." Veronica slowly withdrew the hand, still hiding the knife, neither lowering her guard nor making any other move. Her voice was firm enough to echo in the confined space. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The shadow coughed softly, like a smoker's lungs worn thin after years, then slowly pulled a small zippered bag from his coat. Inside, a shiny black USB reflected the overhead light. He tossed it through a narrow gap, landing at her feet with a sharp plastic tap on the floor, sounding like a verdict awaiting announcement. "My name is Miller." He lowered his cap, revealing a gaunt face with dark, ink-back eye circles. I used to be an undercover agent embedded in the LaRouge team. My job was to monitor him and the high-ranking officials supporting him. But when your case blew up, I became exposed meat, hanging for them to clean up the scent. Veronica crouched down, her fingers touching the icy USB case, but her eyes never left the gun barrel peeking from beneath Miller's coat. He smirked, his laugh bitter with the taste of tobacco. Take it. Inside is the full scan of original files, audio recordings of meetings where LaRouge and his superiors planned traps for your father and then for you. The basement air felt thick like smoke from a fire. Veronica heard her heartbeat pound against her chest, each beat echoing two words, living evidence. She asked harshly, "What do you want? Money? To be removed from the witness list?" Miller shook his head, his shoulders twitching lightly as if mocking the question. "Money can buy my face, but not my wife and kids' faces. I want you to protect them. Even if I have to carry this USB to court, I won't show up myself. If I get exposed, my wife will die before you can even lift the files onto the witness stand." The ventilation fan creaked overhead, the flickering fluorescent light trembling like a weakening eyelid about to close. Veronica gripped the USB tightly, her thumb tracing the plastic edge, veins pulsing painfully toward her wrist. "You don't trust anyone anymore, do you?" Miller laughed, a cracked, off-key sound. "Trust who, my colleagues? Are the prosecutors controlling Lorgerge, or the cops bought off with pocket change? Trusting you, though you're no angel, is still better than trusting the crows in the precinct." They faced each other, two frozen silhouettes in basement B3, only the fan howling to remind them, if one betrays, more blood will spill on the rotting concrete floor tonight. The USB lay snug in Veronica's palm, cold as a bone pulled from its grave. Her heart raced, every vein tightening around her knuckles, but her face remained expressionless. Before her, Miller stood like an old iron pillar, his eyes scanning dark spaces between parked cars, his hoarse voice brushing against clenched teeth. "From now on, you carry this blood stain. They know I escaped, believe I sold them all out. They will hunt me first, then you, then my wife and daughter. One leak, and none of us will live long enough to write wills." Veronica nodded slightly, a cold sweat running down her spine. The USB weighed only a few grams, but pressed on her chest like a stone buried with her father's photo. She replied slowly, each word a cutting vow. "I won't let anyone else die. But you can't disappear either. You will testify. You yourself will watch those bastards kneel beneath the court stand." Miller said no more. He tugged his cap down, his bony shoulders tensing, then turned sharply and walked away in the opposite direction, his shoes striking the concrete floor with dry echoes, leaving behind a lone concrete pillar like a blood-bending talisman. Veronica stood still for a few more breaths, hearing the fans screech and her heart breaking into two halves, one half the sleep craving long dead, the other the hunger for justice not yet satisfied. As she exited the basement door, New York's night wind rushed into her coat, cold as ice, carrying the scent of gasoline, damp file covers, and fear rising from her back to her neck. Her phone vibrated incessantly in her pocket, the assistant lawyer texting from the temporary office, press flooding her inbox, threatening to publish articles titled "Hayes Desperate, Case About to Collapse." Reporters lurking under the old apartment sent dozens of anonymous messages offering hush money to buy secrets about Miller. Veronica ignored them all. She jumped into a taxi running the night shift, her back pressed against the seat, holding back the tremors in her chest. Her hand clenched the USB so tightly the veins turned blue, sweat soaking the plastic edges, cold as a fresh copper bullet just fired from a barrel. Outside the window, New York's neon lights flashed, casting red and yellow glows on her face, before slipping away like blood flowing through the fingers of those who still believe they can silence justice with a few lives. Inside the taxi, Veronica closed her eyes for a second, whispering, unheard by the driver, "I will turn this blood into a blaze, and I swear no one will ever put it out again." The taxi merged into the night traffic, leaving behind a basement wet with old concrete dust, where a blood curse had just been tied with another knot, and New York had never felt colder. The office door clicked shut sharply behind Veronica. Inside, the flickering fluorescent light buzzed weakly, illuminating a desk speckled with coffee stains and sticky notes covering the edges of an old laptop. She sank into a chair, her hand trembling slightly as she pulled the USB Miller had given her from her coat pocket. The shiny black plastic reflected the white light like a knife hidden beneath its casing. Veronica took a breath and plugged it into the laptop's side USB port. The screen flickered for a few seconds before revealing a series of folders with fragmented names. Meeting_recordings, memo_internal, payroll_chain, blacklisted_cases. Each file attachment dated back over 15 years, matching the dark milestones she had traced since her father was framed. Her mouse cursor hovered, and she opened an audio file. LaRouge's gravelly voice echoed in a conference room, accompanied by another man's deeper voice, laughing briefly as they discussed how to arrange evidence to imprison an innocent suspect, then reporting to request additional public safety funding. Veronica fell silent. She clicked again to reveal a grainy image from a hidden camera. A group of men in suits, faces obscured under yellow lights, clinking red wine glasses over a thick stack of papers. On those papers was the logo of the city's largest construction company, a railway project proposal, and a budget inflated threefold. Each file unfolded like a wound clawing at her liver. Not just LaRouge, not just the police chief, but also a city councilman, the CEO of a real estate corporation, and several private security contractors who supplied dirty manpower to eliminate living evidence. All the taxpayers' money was sliced up and funneled back into the pockets of security overseers, paid to police staged arrests, then report to request more funds for enhanced security in poor neighborhoods. Veronica flipped through an attached list. Her father's name stood out at the top, next to a handwritten note, handled, "Don't let the wife and kids speak." Below was Daniel, the man who died under the intruder's gun barrel. There were dozens of unfamiliar names she had never met, but whose blood had been spilled to fatten the bellies of those sitting in cold rooms, pouring red wine, laughing heartily. She closed the file, her fingers gripping her briefcase strap so tightly her nails left marks in her palm without her noticing. Letting out a long breath, Veronica stared at the tangled web chart pinned on the wall. A rotten network she had to unravel strand by strand. A whisper slipped through clenched teeth. "My father's blood is not buried in the ground. It flows in this file." In her eyes, the fluorescent light gleamed off pupils sharp as knives honed on the blood of the innocent. Veronica spent exactly 3 hours printing excerpts from each USB file, organizing them into a coherent chain spread across the old conference table. The yellow light fractured over papers marked with red dots, squiggly arrows connecting LaRouge's photo to the city councilman's signature, then twisting toward security contracts plastered with the real estate corporation's famous logo. Leaning on the table's edge, her index finger tapped lightly on the central node of the power web, her voice hoarse from sleeplessness. "Don't reveal everything at once. Release it piece by piece. Make them tear each other apart." The next morning, a reporter from the national news channel, the Tribune, was invited into a closed meeting room. He carried a recorder, a handheld camera, and a still steaming cup of coffee, which went cold moments after his eyes scanned the red-inked diagram covering the table. Veronica pushed an audio file toward him, already playing, LaRouge's voice, the commander's voice, the councilman's voice, alongside short laughs discussing how to skim the budget through proper legal arrests. The reporter's hand holding the recorder trembled, his face pale. If all this is true, this is no longer about dirty cops. This is a gang in suits stealing the people's taxes every day. He looked at Veronica, voice hoarse. "What do you want me to do? Publish it immediately?" Veronica shook her head, her lips curling slightly, cold as a blade. "If you do, they will kill the witnesses, burn the remaining files, then wash their hands like always. I want to tighten the noose on every single one. Not a single one should crawl out of the mud." They leaned over the map together, the reporter, Veronica, and the two remaining lawyers. The plan was set. Leak data packages layer by layer along the hierarchy. Start with a few low-level councilmen caught with slush funds. When one desperately denies responsibility, immediately release a recording revealing the superior's trap. Each exposed link pulls down a higher level to self-defend, and every time they struggle, new evidence appears to block their escape route. The meeting ended with backstage lights aimed directly at Veronica's face. The reporter's camera zoomed in on her pupils, catching the bloodshot veins and the cold iron in her voice. "This city needs to know how rotten it really is, from their own mouths, not from me." And in that yellow-lit room, a wildflower soaked in blood for years now shed its petals. Its stench Veronica would use to lure every rat out of the hole, starting tonight. The first file went live at 3 a.m., the hour when the powerful usually sleep soundly, certain the darkness was thick enough to hide their dirty money under council seats. A 12-minute audio clip captured the city council president's voice and a trusted councilman, sneering as they discussed doubling the police budget, then secretly siphoning off slush funds to front companies. A phrase slipped out. "Just arrest a few more black guys, keep the media quiet." It cut straight to the nerve of a city drowning in taxes and wrongful convictions. Within 10 minutes of the Tribune reporter sharing the file, other reporters swarmed City Hall. Live on Facebook, Twitter, thousands of cameras buzzed like angry bees around the emergency meeting room's glass doors. People flooded the streets with crudely painted banners. "Justice is not a painted coffin for dead bodies." The hashtag #HazeLeaks climbed a global trending, a slap across the faces of councilmen used microphones to shout hollow promises of fairness. In the closed meeting rooms of officials, phones rang relentlessly. The council president, face gray and contorted, slammed the table and ordered the original clip deleted, but it was too late. Backups were scattered across international platforms, no server fast enough to block them. Some tried to sneak out of the country with bribed plane tickets that night. Others hurriedly burned contracts, smashed hard drives, destroyed papers. But the press crowded at office doors, flashlights glaring hard into each face. Veronica sat in the lawyer's meeting room, head bowed, eyes sharp as a sharpening stone. Release more. The money-laundering businessman's case. Drop it before sundown. Those bastards still think they can pull their feet out in time. Let them strangle themselves with their own words. As she predicted, the new audio exposed a major real estate corporation paying police to torture witnesses and intimidate them into selling off planning land cheaply. Citizens stormed the corporation's headquarters, throwing eggs and holding banners. "Our money is red." Foreign reporters clung tightly to every piece of news. Then, among the crowd pressing before the city hall's gates, Veronica appeared. Long coat, no makeup on her eyes. Old handcuff scars still visible on her wrist. In her hand, fresh summons printed with the names of a string of councilmen and corporation executives leading the network. She stood before the press microphone, voice as firm as a coffin nail. "Your night of manipulation is over. From now on, I will break every bone for this city to see, and every drop of my father's blood will make you pay with your own flesh." Amid cheers, the #HazeLeaks hashtag burned hotter than ever. The storm was far from over. Veronica knew the blood would keep flowing. The first morning session began before the sun had fully climbed above the glass rooftops. Yet the hallway of the central courthouse was already packed with people. Outside, security fences stretched long, and crowds held banners demanding true justice, Several cardboard signs marked with the hashtag Justice for All raised high amid the chants, pounding like hammers on the rotten shell of honor once worn by those who had sat in seats of power. Inside the courtroom, every seat in the audience was taken, from print reporters and television crews to those who had once cursed Veronica when she was falsely accused, now squeezing in to witness the truth finally revealed. Black-suited bodyguards patrolled close to the walls, eyes scanning swiftly for any sign of unrest, while microphones and cameras captured every angle without exception. Veronica stepped slowly into the stream of lenses, her dark blue vest fitting snugly over her slight shoulders, hands gripping a thick dossier that, only 3 days before, had nearly buried her beneath cold handcuffs. Flashes popped a few times, but no one dared whistle or sneer anymore. Only a dense silence hung in the air, punctuated by eyes half admiring, half fearful as she passed. On the prosecution side, a trusted colleague spoke first, his tone firm and each word like a nail driven into the wooden table. They played video footage extracted from hidden cameras placed overnight in the archive room, enlarged images of transfer sheets exceeding limits, and then audio recordings of mocking voices plotting to trap Veronica. The defendant's bench, once occupied by faces flanked by polished escorts, now hung their heads low, brows dripping sweat. The defense lawyers occasionally stood up to object, clinging to procedural loopholes, but the prosecution swiftly dismissed them with cold numbers and bank stamps that told no lies. Murmurs rose each time Veronica bowed to the judge. Her voice was steady, unshaken, but every answer cut into those still hoping to twist the truth. When the prosecution requested a pause to call a surprise witness, the courtroom's attention shifted to the door. A man entered, unremarkable in appearance, with a plain dark shirt, but his eyes, fixed intently on the defendants, sent chills through the room. He was the anonymous agent who had once broken in with Veronica, now stepping forward under protection to testify. He spoke in a calm, unembellished voice about hacking through the system's firewall to download files everyone thought destroyed. When he presented a short tape showing conversations about destroying evidence, a defense lawyer jumped up, shifting the attack to Veronica's private life and dredging up her father's death to undermine her credibility. Veronica did not let him savor the moment. She stood tall, eyes fixed on the judge, but voice loud enough for all to hear, declaring that those sitting on the defendant's bench had driven her father and hundreds of other people of color into despair just to keep their clean sheet power seats. Every sentence was weighted by the breath she had held since she was 15, standing silently before her father's photograph, framed in tarnished wood. The tension nearly burst when the judge finally spoke, his voice firm and hoarse after 3 hours of testimony. He declared a recess for deliberation and would continue with the verdict after a closed session. Everyone stood simultaneously. The scraping of chairs on tiled floors rang sharply, but was overshadowed by nearly unanimous eyes turning to Veronica, some teary, as if they saw not just a female lawyer, but the image of a father behind her, smiling in a room scented with wood and freshly cleansed justice. The break turned the courthouse corridor into a lively news forest, with reporters crowding to shove microphones near lawyers' faces, cameras flashing rapidly. Everyone leaving the courtroom was immediately surrounded by urgent questions about what was happening inside, about the powerful figures facing prison, and whether this historic trial would truly wash away the decades-old corruption entrenched in the justice system. Outside the courthouse gates, Veronica's supporters lit flares and shouted "Justice for all," the colored smoke mingling with police sirens, creating a tense atmosphere like a taut string ready to snap. Inside, Veronica leaned against a smooth white wall, the smell of old paint mixed with human breath reminding her of nights spent clutching her father's photo, crying herself dry. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and opened them with one clear thought: end it all today, or more blood would be shed in generations to come. When the judge returned to his seat, the room suddenly fell silent, cutting off the rapid breaths from outside the glass. The wooden gavel struck the table sharply, sounding like an iron hammer, reverberating through every spectator's chest. The prosecutor adjusted his glasses, his steady voice carrying the weight that pinned down those clinging to false hopes. Organized money laundering, decades of abuse of power, fabricating evidence to smear the innocent, manipulating media to bury cries of injustice. Each charge dropped like a stone thrown into a deep well, with no echo returning. LaRouge was brought in, his prison uniform making his face even paler, his hollow eyes fixed on Veronica. He muttered confessions, not daring to raise his head while recalling nights obeying orders to frame her, bribe cheap reporters, and destroy evidence. Every detail he admitted struck like a hammer on the defendant's bench, where men who once drank, shook hands, and laughed heartily, now sat silently, their shirts rumpled and soaked with sweat. A tired defense lawyer stood shakily, requesting a postponement due to client's mental exhaustion, but the judge cut him off. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth needed no further delay. The final gavel fell in the now dead silent room, followed by the judge's aged but resolute voice reading the preliminary verdict line by line. A number of powerful names were sentenced to prison, assets frozen, professional licenses revoked, and some forced to publicly bow and apologize before the cameras. Just seconds later, applause erupted from a corner of the gallery and quickly spread like a wave crashing ashore, sweeping up the elderly, students, and mothers carrying children on their shoulders, cheering outside as the loudspeakers broadcast the verdict live. In that moment, Veronica remained seated in the prosecutor's chair, hands intertwined to steady her trembling. Her ears rang, but her heart beat oddly calm as the judge mentioned her father's name, officially recognizing his wrongful death years ago and clearing every charge that had tarnished the record of the man who raised her with honor. She rose as others did, bowing slightly instead of a formal salute, eyes wet but voice steady. A single tear fell onto the dossier stamped with a red seal, the only tear for old pain now washed clean by the verdict witnessed by millions of eyes. As Veronica stepped out the door amid applause and calls of her name, no one saw the sweat darkening her shirt back. They only saw the confident stride of someone who had opened a new chapter for justice, leaving no place for the stinking shadows of power long believed untouchable. The temporary grandstand was set up right before the steps of the old courthouse, where Veronica's father had once been tried many years ago. Though the building had been freshly painted, the scent of fear and musty memories still seemed to seep from the cracks in the brick walls. A gray sky hung over the entire morning, while news crews laid cables and camera lenses crowded the simple wooden podium. The crowd did not jostle like in those futile protests demanding overturned verdicts years before, but stood in groups, holding signs painted with white letters. "Thank you, Veronica Hayes." A brief phrase that spoke as a quiet apology from hundreds who had once turned their backs when her father fell to the cold prison floor under charges no one had ever seen evidence for. The microphone crackled as the host finished speaking, and a thin ray of sunlight sliced through the heavy clouds, shining directly on the wooden steps where Veronica slowly stepped up. In her hands was the final dossier, its spine worn and edges curled. Inside was not only the belated exoneration of her father, a paper too late to return breath to a man who died in darkness, but also a dense list of names, lives buried beneath the silence this system had nourished for 2 decades. Veronica wore no lawyer's coat and stood not from a position of power, but as a thin woman with her hair pinned high, eyes fixed firmly on the hundreds watching below. Seeking neither pity nor praise, her voice rose, not loud nor thunderous, but the low tone of someone who had cried enough to know that all shouting was meaningless when justice was silenced. She recounted that afternoon long ago when a black girl clung to a rotten wooden doorframe, watching her father being dragged away by police from their porch. She spoke of mornings biking to school beneath neighbors' scornful gazes, whispers calling her a sellout, lingering like a wound that would never heal. Her mother had died of cancer. The doctor said tumor, but Veronica knew the true seed was the shame piled on a widow lighting incense for a husband who died in a prison cell. The listeners bowed their heads, cameras still rolling but silent except for the sound of pages turning as Veronica set the dossier down on the podium. She closed her eyes briefly, counting sleepless nights, death threats, and warning letters tucked beneath windshield wipers. Opening them, her voice steadied like the wooden floor beneath her feet. Justice is not a slogan hung on courthouse doors. Justice is the blood and tears of those who no longer have breath to cry out. She raised the dossier, its cover trembling in the wind, her voice blending with the rustling paper, yet unbroken. I will hand this entire file over to an independent oversight committee. No one from the old system shall be allowed to touch or alter a single comma again. The names began to be read aloud, slowly and with respect. Each name carved itself into the crowd's memory. A child who lost a father, wrongly arrested. A mother who died in prison accused of drug possession. A young man who never graduated due to corrupt police fabricating charges. The wind fluttered the papers in Veronica's hands, blowing strands of hair across her cheek. She stood there amid the breeze, and hundreds of eyes growing blurry with tears, her voice merging with the sunlight spreading over the worn wooden steps. They once existed, and no one will be allowed to bury them again. Applause rose, not like a wave, but slow and steady, as if everyone swallowed a sob to replace it with a silent promise. Behind Veronica, the heavy morning clouds finally cracked open, revealing a blur of blue sky, casting sunlight onto her hair and the proud head of one once defamed but never silenced. After the press conference, the crowd dispersed, banners rolled up, and cameras were weaving for late interviews. Veronica quietly left the wooden podium, the heavy dossier in her hands now a lifeline, warming a heart long frozen by past injustice. The courthouse-side corridor welcomed the early noon breeze, rustling her thin jacket as it brushed against arms hardened by bruises left by those in power throughout her struggle. Each step on the rough stone seemed to erase the wrinkles of fear still clinging to her chest. Near the stone steps, a group of young law students waited, their school uniforms bright, eyes shining, hands clutching a fresh pile of files. The youngest girl, voice trembling with excitement and respect, handed Veronica a stack smelling of fresh ink. Miss Hayes, these are the files of other families. They also have people wrongly arrested, not yet able to speak out. They ask you to stand for them next. Veronica gripped the papers tightly. The cold touch of the paper against her palm felt like when she first held her father's death certificate. But this time, these papers carried hope, not a will of despair. She sat down on the stone steps, back against a cracked pillar. The petition spread across her lap. A corner of one page flipped in the wind, revealing the shaky handwriting of a mother who did not know proper grammar but repeated, "Please save my child." Veronica gently stroked the paper, fingertips touching a drop of sweat mixed with tears, whose, in the dark vault of her mind, her father's image returned. A thin man with sloping shoulders, eyes smiling though his back was bent under the weight of shame others imposed. He never taught her to hate, but to stand tall when speaking the truth. A young colleague who had once worked fiercely with her to dig through rotting files quietly sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, a small gesture full of commitment. You have opened the door. Now it is our generation's turn to keep it from closing again. Veronica did not turn, only nodded softly, eyes fixed on the distant street where sunlight spilled thicker, flooding every corner once soaked in injustice. She knew dozens of new doors would rise from the rubble of old walls, and some would try to seal them with power, money, even blood. But no matter what, she would stand guard at this first door until her last breath. Veronica rose, smoothing her coat, clutching the new files at her side. The stone steps led down to the square shimmering in sunlight. People packed away banners and pulled down speakers. but no one could dismantle the newly awakened faith on the faces of mothers, children, and those who once believed justice was only a silent slogan. She walked through the crowd, a few hands reaching out to gently touch her shoulder or sleeve, gathering courage from a slender woman who had never surrendered. Behind her, the courthouse wall, mottled with silver moss, suddenly blazed under the vertical sunlight. The streak of light painted a long mark across the stone, like a handprint, etched as a warning to those in power. Once awakened, justice will never bow again. Veronica Hayes' story is not merely a case of entrapment or a spectacular comeback for justice. It is a wake-up call for all of us about the habit of judging others only by what the eyes see and the ears hear. Prejudice may distort truth, but no one can bury talent and human worth forever beneath the mud of rumors and slander. Veronica's resilience proves that justice always finds a way out, as long as someone dares to stand firm in the storm and refuses to be silenced by darkness. Never let narrow judgment kill an innocent person, and never doubt the power of truth when it reaches the light. Have you ever been misunderstood because someone didn't truly know you? Have you ever been underestimated but silently proven yourself better than expected? If this story makes you think, share it so more people can learn a valuable lesson. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more inspiring stories where justice always finds a way to win.